Giving bad people good ideas. I keep giving bad people good ideas. I keep giving bad people good ideas. I keep giving bad people good ideas.
Let's do it. Let's record another episode of Like a Paper Radio. Hello. My name is Andy, and I'm here as always with my co-host Anthony. Has lots of great ideas, Maddox.
And a lot of bad ideas.
Do you have bad ideas too?
Yeah, of course. I just don't tell you about them.
Citations needed.
Sometimes looking like you have good ideas. It's just about hiding the bad ones, right?
Yeah, I think it's actually a pretty inspiring and encouraging mentality.
I don't think so, actually, because I think you should be encouraged to share your mistakes and your ideas that didn't quite... you shouldn't feel ashamed, necessarily, of putting all your ideas out there.
Right, I guess what I was saying is I like the read that people that appear to have a bunch of good ideas just secretly have a bunch of bad ideas that you haven't seen. That it's not that some people are just super geniuses with cool ideas, it's just that some people have more ideas and, you get a couple hits in there. This is thematic, though, because this episode, we're going to share our ideas for cubes that we, for whatever reason, couldn't quite follow through on, and encourage you to steal them and design them for your own. I think these cube ideas that I'm bringing to the table are very cool, and for various reasons we'll talk about, I was not able to or willing to follow through on them, and I'm hoping that some of our listeners will and make some cool cubes out of it.
Interesting. Well, the two ideas that I wanted to bring, I think might actually just be genuinely bad ideas, and I feel like I wasn't able to solve them, and yeah, maybe that is just I wasn't willing to put in the work, or didn't feel like putting in the work, and somebody else could crack them.
I have mostly two ideas too, but I have a third that is a small thing, which maybe I'll start with. We can start there, and then we'll move on to you next. The third thing I have, which is an idea that I have had independently. I've talked to Jane about it. I know Jane has independently had it. And then on the episode of Recross the Paths with Loxodon Myarch, whose real name I'm forgetting at the moment, I'm sorry, it turns out that he also had a kind of similar idea, and that is an aesthetic idea for a sun-bleached cube. How many sun-bleached Magic cards have you seen?
A fair number. A couple people occasionally will either have, like, here's my commander deck that's been all bleached, or here's my trade binder where I've just got one page of weird old sun-bleached cards.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, if you do store a Magic card face up in a very sunny spot, like in your window, or I think some people do this specifically, like on their windshields, like under their dashboard, on the dashboard of their car, or under their back windshield, where you can just get tons of sun exposed to it. Specific ink colors, the reds especially, tend to get really sun-bleached and just wash out. So you can get like a almost completely white looking, lightning bolt or whatever. But it affects all cards, but it does affect certain colors more prominently. This has long been in my quiver as like if the right idea comes along for a cube that would be really cool to be sun-bleached for whatever reason, I would be really excited about sun-bleaching a bunch of cards to put into a cube. Now, on the episode of Recross the Paths, Loxodon Myarch talked about doing this or attempting to do this with the basic lands for the very first Desert Cube, which is kind of an obvious... Like, that's a good sort of way you could thematically, if you were going with a desert theme in addition to your desert cube, you could have that mechanically then connected to the actual resonance of the cards. My only desert cube has nothing to do thematically with deserts, though, so that wouldn't really work for me. I think the other sort of option there is to pair it with something that cares about getting a little freaky with colored mana costs, because I do think if the cube is entirely bleached, it just can become a little less usable if you do a really good job bleaching all the cards. It might be harder to distinguish specific colors of cards at a distance or in a draft pack or whatever. And so maybe it makes sense in a cube where you're getting weird with color in some way. It's a color twisted cube or a partial color pie cube or something. That's just an idea that I think would be very cool that I've never even designed any list. I mean, these other two ideas I've put lists together. I've tried. This idea, I've never tried a list for it, but it's been an aesthetic thing floating around in the back of my head that I really think someone should do. I've never seen a fully sun-bleached cube. Have you? I should say, too, as a preamble to all of this, we are not aware of every single cube that exists. You may be listening and thinking, I have that cube.
I am certain this one exists.
How dare they not know about my cube? I'm not certain this one exists. I'm not going to go that far, but maybe these already exist out there, but I've never seen one. If you do have one, send us a link. You are sort of obligated to scan all the cards, put them in Cube Cobra if you're going to have this cube list, because you got to see those sun-bleached cards. They're very cool looking, and yeah, I think would be a very cool aesthetic bit or aesthetic hook to a cube if there's a mechanical reason to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting idea, especially compared to the kind of crunchy mechanical ideas that I'm going to bring up, because it is like totally aesthetic. And I'm trying to think of ways that you could tie that into a mechanical theme. It's obviously a way that you could separate two cards to be like, hey, these are the Sunbleached cards and here are the normal cards.
Sure.
And have some way to either just by choosing which kind of cards fit into those two buckets in order to kind of like send a message to your players about what to expect in this environment. Or, you could also build custom cards that specifically interact with that. The other thing you can do with it is you can obviously just take a card, tape it to your window, wait a month until it gets bleached. You could also add a mask, either with tape or, some other material on top of the card to partially cover it, and then remove that mask so you're only bleaching part of the card. And that might be another way you could actually, like, either subtly or maybe not so subtly, totally alter a card or, like, change the emphasis on certain aspects of it that could have some mechanical implications as well.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool, if you had a cube where you wanted to draw special attention to, a handful of creatures in each color because they were like the power outliers or whatever, to like just sunbleach those
or sunbleach everything else
so they like stand out more brightly. Could be kind of cool. Yeah, I don't know. I think sunbleach cards look really cool, and that would be a sick aesthetic hook for a cube. Again, if you could pair it with something like you mentioned, Anthony, or even just an Amonkhet cube that you really like that doesn't have any mechanical twist at all. It's just an Amonkhet cube, but if you sunbleach all the cards.
Okay, I know this isn't supposed to be the let's solve these problems podcast, but another thing that would be kind of interesting is if you just like, no, this would be so much work. I'm just thinking if you like constantly kept the cards exposed, and then as you change the cube, you would add new cards,
yes,
and then you would
see
this
cool.
kind of like
I had this thought.
visualization of, oh, this is a new card because it looks really new, and this card's been here forever because it looks, let's call it mostly played. There's not a lot of card left in this card. That would be cool, but a lot of logistical overhead.
Yeah, I did have that thought, and I was like, it turns out that an entire cube face-up does take up like 2 very large dining tables worth of space. Mm-hmm. And so unless you happen to have like a greenhouse with a bunch of room in it where you could possibly do this, and you're willing to every single time you draft the cube, go pick it up off the table and then return it there afterwards, all laid out ornately, that'd be very cool.
I think this is a great idea.
But it would be a shit ton of work. So if you're going to do that, then for sure email us the results of that. I definitely want to see that. That's my first half idea. My other two, I promise, Anthony, are much more interesting and meaty. But what's your first cube idea that you are asking our listeners to steal?
So I was looking through, obviously I have just like a huge pile of half-baked cube ideas, and a lot of them are pretty straightforward. Like my main cube, regular cube, is just like, here's cards I like. And it has a couple sort of mechanical themes, and it's very easy for me to imagine taking like just a different set of mechanical themes and building a different cube in that similar vein. But that's not a very interesting prompt to say, like, here's the thing I left on the cutting room floor. Have you thought about enchantments as a theme? Like, yes, many people have done that. Or I've tried to design a multiplayer cube in the past, but that's obviously like a pretty clear exercise. So I wanted to pull out some of the weirder things that I've experimented with. First one being, I at some point tried to design a cube where you could only win the game through alternate win conditions. So you still start at 20 life, it is a normal-ish game, but you don't lose the game for having less than 0 life. And then I included almost all of what was at the time the alternate ways to win the game.
Cards that say you win the game on them, basically.
Right, so unfortunately, the one major outlier to this was Battle of Wits, which says you win the game if you have 200 cards in your library. I just couldn't really figure out a way to make that work. But things that say if you have 100 life at the beginning of your upkeep, you win the game. Things that say if you deal damage to this somewhat difficult to cast creature, you win the game. Or Strixhaven Stadium or Helix Pinnacle that just sort of ask you to do a bunch of different things, jump through certain hoops, and then you just win. I thought this cube was like a surprisingly interesting little design project or sort of like puzzle to solve, because many of those cards do ask you to do something. And so trying to fit within, did I actually keep it down to 360 cards? I think I did 384 cards, yeah, so 16 card packs. And then figuring out how can I add enough cards that will key off of these other cards that it can still turn into some kind of interesting gameplay. So a lot of things that proliferate. You still need creatures for a lot of these alternate win conditions. You need ways to get a bunch of creatures in the graveyard, things like that. And just figuring out how can I like make every card enough of a role player in multiple of these different contexts was a weird exercise. And it does turn out there's a fair amount of overlap between those different archetypes. So saying, here's an artifact creature, that's still going to pay you off for you win the game if you have 10 artifacts, or you win the game if you have 100 creatures, or you win the game if maybe it's an artifact creature that makes mana. It also is going to dump mana into your Helix Pinnacle.
You said it was a surprisingly interesting design project. I am also surprised it was interesting because
it doesn't sound very interesting.
I believe this was also how Ollie first drafted the Creatureless Cube, if I'm not mistaken.
Interesting.
I think it also started as a alternate win condition cube and then evolved to eventually what we call the Creatureless Cube today. Yeah, my first intuition is like, this sounds awful because it really seems like the cards that are like the you win the game sort of achievement cards just require you to like do something, and that is often pretty uninteractive with your opponent. It's like, just put 100 counters on Helix Pinnacle, just get your library empty and play Labman or, Jace Wheeler of Mysteries or Thassa's Oracle, just get 200 cards in your library, just gain 100 life. And I would expect the cards, like you said, to all ask very specific things of you as a drafter and player, which makes overlap kind of hard to come by. And I would also expect that the games would just come down to each person trying to do their thing and not really resembling a typical game of Magic.
Yeah, definitely. And I, to be clear, never actually playtested this cube, so I don't know if any of the ideas that I came up with worked. It turned out there were a lot of ways to still create some interaction, but that was my biggest concern as well. Like, it's either all or nothing. You do your thing and you win the game, or there was no interaction. So by categorizing all these different types of win conditions and realizing, okay, well, being able to be at a specific life total is important. So we still need creatures in combat to be able to control life totals, because that's one way that you want to prevent players from winning the game outright. And I think that there could be some interesting experience in sort of sussing out what win conditions do you think your opponent has. And probably they need multiples, because we do want to have counter spells and things that are going to prevent somebody from putting together one of these combos. I don't know if it would work, and I think that balancing that interaction is very difficult. But I think ultimately, the gameplay probably would just be too slow and overwrought and complicated and too swingy that, like, I felt like I pushed it about as far as I could and still didn't look at it and think, like, oh yeah, this is a list that obviously seems fun to play.
How far did you get? You did make a full 384 card cube.
Yes.
Are you a big practice drafter on Cube Cobra? Did you do practice drafts?
It was difficult with this particular cube to do the practice drafts, because the bots would just say, oh, Hedron alignment, I'll just never take that card ever because it doesn't make any sense.
And you put 4 copies in the cube or more?
So there are a couple other ways I broke the rules. I believe with Hedron alignment and Biovisionary, I said if you draft one, you get 2 additional copies. Maybe I'm getting the numbers wrong on that, but the idea was you don't just get the full package that allows you to win, you still need to draft at least 2 in order to feel like you have a viable package, and if you draft more, it becomes more effective. I think a lot of people looked at this list and immediately said, oh, well, you should give people 4, like, giving them 3 isn't enough, it's not going to work, and it's like, well, that's the idea. I still want you to try and have to draft a little bit.
I thought Hedron alignment required that you have 4.
Right.
Okay.
So you get 3, and then there were multiple copies in the cube, so you still need to draft multiple in order to have enough.
You think this is an idea worth stealing or no?
No.
Okay. So this is more just of an idea that you left on the cutting room floor, not one to steal per se.
Yeah, but I mean, I would be curious if somebody wanted to throw this in Cockatrice. I think one of the reasons, I did try and keep it updated for a couple sets, but I think that around this time, when did I even make this? It was a couple years ago.
I didn't know you ever updated a cube for any set.
Shut up.
That wasn't me being spicy. This is a genuine realization I just had.
They just started printing new alternate win conditions like in almost every single set, and it just got to be too much.
That's something I definitely do not have my finger on the pulse of.
It doesn't matter. And it's like, here's some obscure double-faced 4-sided card that you've never seen before, and it's like obscure and written on the back that if you control every version of the Doctor, if you control every single Doctor, you win the game. And I was like, well, this takes up too much space. This can't be viable.
Well, if you think this idea is not worth stealing, let's move on to one that I think is stealing, because this next idea is one that I think is so close to being good and having legs, and I could work on it harder and probably get it there, but it definitely has some barriers and some challenges to be overcome. Now, I'm an aging man, Anthony. I'll be 38 this year, and I would have sworn this is an idea that I had. However, I know that I talked with Greg about this, of the Companion Cube, Dinner of a Horror, and Greg maybe thinks that he had this idea and gave it to me. I'm going to say I don't know how this idea came to be, but I do know that I spent some time designing this cube on my own without awareness of Greg and his own independent attempts to design a similar cube with the same sort of restriction. So we both have done this independently, and I think we both felt like the idea had promise, but we couldn't figure it out. And so now we're opening it up. I'm opening it up. I haven't asked Greg about this. I guess I probably should. I'm opening this up to the entire world to take this idea and run with it. And the idea is For me, it came from a combination of the sort of bar cube movement, which for those that don't know, there's a lot of people that call cubes that don't have any tokens, don't have any counters, bar cubes, because they're convenient to play at the bar because you don't have any extra game stuff you have to carry around or keep track of. So bar cubes without any tokens or counters were sort of getting popular, and I had this thought about like, it's really annoying if you have no tokens and counters, you still have to keep track of your life total. Like you have to have a D20 or your phone or whatever. Like that feels like one of the extra things too, in addition to counters or tokens that you would need for a cube, is like keeping track of your life total. And so I was like, could you make a cube where your life total was just the number of cards remaining in your library? Therefore, it's not your life total in any meaningful sense because Magic already has you lose the game when you draw from an empty library, which I think
But additionally, if you take damage, you exile cards from your library.
Well, so here's the first hiccup. I, for like weeks, worked on this cube thinking it was a Crumbling Sanctuary emblem cube. Crumbling Sanctuary is a 5-mana artifact that says for each 1 damage will be dealt to a player. That player removes the top card of their library from the game instead, so exiles top card of their library. I legitimately, for weeks, thought this made you mill instead of exile, because I only think this is interesting if you mill, or at least rather, the version I'm interested in is one where you mill, because the other tension I wanted to play on was this idea that it would be a Graveyard Matters cube. There's a lot of Graveyard Matters mechanics. I was inspired by cubes like the Degenerate Microcube, my own Microcube, and the Life from a Loam cube as well, which all have these like weird rules modifications to get you to the point of the game where your library is small and you have, access to these graveyard resources. And I thought it'd be really interesting if, as you were playing all these matches in this cube, every time you hit your opponent, you were inherently giving them some value. Like, they were getting better, their cards were getting stronger by the fact that their life total was lower, which I think maybe kind of has this like Death Shadow mirror vibe to it, where like Death Shadow, your creatures are all better the closer you are to death, but that is inherently dangerous to be close to death. And I was like, okay, if we have cards with Delve, if we have cards that put cards from your graveyard back into your library, if we have, all these sort of things that matter in the graveyard otherwise, that have flashback or whatever, every time you hit your opponent, you're ahead because you just hit them. So +1 for you in your winning column, but you also just gave them a bunch of resources to make their cards better. And I thought that would make for a really interesting dynamic back and forth that I was really excited about. And I was genuinely crushed when I discovered that Crumbling Sanctuary, when I actually read the one sentence on Crumbling Sanctuary, which I had shortcutted because I played with this card when I was a kid. I remembered it. I thought it was mill, but it's not. It's exile, which ruined a lot of the fun I had for that particular idea because you couldn't just have one emblem in play that made sense of it. Now, there is a card...
I think you can still just make up an emblem. I think the fact that it is a reference to an existing card is kind of convenient. It's helpful people know that card, but the Crumbling Sanctuary is not a card that most people are going to know anyway, so I think it is a simple enough custom rule you can very easily just make that work.
This is one of my hangups. I didn't want to do that, and that was part of the reason that I got less excited about this cube idea. Is I was like, I discovered that I had misread this card, and there wasn't a clean example. Now, there is Mind Crank, which is a card that when your opponent takes damage, they also mill, which I don't like for a couple reasons. One, you would need 2 of them because it only cares about your opponent, and 2, it's in addition to taking damage. So this cube would inherently not have anything about like paying life in it, for example, because I don't want you to have to care about your life total, which I'm not going to modify the rules and say you don't have a life total. I'm just going to say that by all the cards I included, your life total is irrelevant. So you're never paying life, all that kind of stuff. You're never making an opponent lose life. You're only ever dealing damage because that's the thing that's replaced by Crumbling Sanctuary. Yes, I could make a custom emblem. I was really excited about the idea that it was as simple a rules modification as just saying this card is an emblem in play at all times, and it's an existing card. I know for sure it works with all the rules. I don't have to source art for it. I don't have to like print and design a version of it. I can just go get a bunch of copies of this card and have it be on the table, which is a purely aesthetic thing to your point. Like, I think it's a pretty simple emblem to design. I wouldn't be worried about like missing something in the rules. It would be pretty easy to write that rules text up, but that was one of the reasons I got less excited about this idea. Another reason was after I eventually became aware that Greg had also already explored this idea before. One of the things he reported, which I had been a little worried about, was that it was actually pretty annoying to not know your life total at a given time.
That's
because
an interesting point, yeah.
You have to look at your library and count all the cards in it to know what your life total is.
Isn't it convenient that I don't have to know? But then you kind of do want to know what your life total is. Then you're being attacked for 10,
and you're like, am I at 13 or 16, right? Which does seem pretty annoying.
So
now,
what we've just learned is that like numbers are actually good, and sometimes just saying I have this many jelly beans is not as useful as having the number of jelly beans.
To be fair, I think that problem could perhaps be solved through the cards included in the cube, right? Like if you have, for example, not a lot of huge creatures with the high power level, right? If a lot of the damage is pretty incremental and like chip damage, if there are enough ways to put cards from your graveyard back into your library such that that's like a core feature of the cube, then getting down to lower life totals, like you don't really care being at 3 because, you know, if you don't include, for example, face burn, then being at 3, you're like, you know, you're safe and you're actually going to use that to reshuffle cards from your like library into your graveyard, right?
Okay, because I was going to say that doesn't sound very safe when you're also losing 1 life a turn.
Yes, from drawing cards.
Yeah,
exactly, yeah. So that's the other sort of, I think, hiccup or maybe bigger sort of speed bump to this cube idea is how do you, in the parts of the game where like the amount of cards in your library is not immediately easy to grok, right? Like I'm proposing if you could design the cube, I think, in a way where your life total doesn't specifically matter until you're down to like under 10, right? And then you can like kind of fan out 10 cards and like look pretty quickly. It's not as annoying. It's annoying if you're like at somewhere above 15 life and you really care about, you know, what that number is because you're being attacked for some big chunk of damage or something. So I think you could design the cube with, you know, not having face burn, not having, you know, things that have big, like, you know, individual swings of life totals to make that work. But that was another hurdle that made me sort of abandon this idea. But I still think it is a very cool concept. I think it would require making a custom emblem, or you could run the Crumbling Sanctuary version and not have it be a Graveyard Matters cube. But again, for me, that does remove half of what I find is interesting about it, which is that it's got a natural sort of comeback mechanic built in, where the lower life total you're at, every color, every, you know, deck is going to have stuff that matters in the graveyard that is going to make their deck better when they have a big graveyard, and you can then take advantage of that.
You just put 1 Angel of Suffering in between you and say, we share this. That card says you mill twice the number of cards of damage you would be dealt. But we just say we share it. So we each lose 1 card per life.
1 Angel of Suffering, neither of us control it.
Neither of us control it.
It's just there.
It's just around. It's just sort of setting the tone. Who knows where ideas come from? I've definitely thought about this a little bit as well, not as in-depth as you have, but the idea of just there's no extra components is very cool. I think that the issue that you brought up of it just being kind of like more annoying to track than you thought it would be, I think that's a real issue, and I hadn't thought of that. I think it'd be really heartbreaking the first time you see somebody pull out a D20 and put it on top of their library and say, well, now I'm using this as a counter because this has become too annoying and I'm going to manually tick it down, and you've actually done the opposite of what you set out to do and sort of create this extra layer on top of that. What appears to be simplicity. I wonder if the solve might actually be the opposite of what you're saying, though, because if you're talking about all the creatures are small and there's like not a lot of, ways that my opponent's going to have a burn spell to finish me off out of nowhere, that's the kind of gameplay where I wonder if those like little incremental bits of damage might matter a lot. And if instead it's like, oh, you have an 8/8? Great. I know I've got like less than 8 cards in my library, or I know I have less than 16,
2 hits,
so it's like 2 hits. It actually might be easier to shortcut some of those things and saying like, oh, yep, you had Fire Blast and I wasn't going to beat that anyway. Like, I think the opposite might almost be better.
I guess a better way of putting it is like, I think if you designed the cube such that decks really only started to hum when they had very few cards in their library, and a lot of decks, if not every deck, was about somehow looping its resources.
Sure.
Then it's not really about like, oh no, I'm going to 3. It's like, I'm just getting to the state where my deck can do its thing, and that would necessitate, again, not having Fire Blasts or Lava Axes or whatever. But I think it is a problem you could begin to address and figure out.
I like how cards like Char would function here, where you're like, I really want to do some damage to myself to start milling some cards and get things in the graveyard.
Yeah, or make it all about that, where it's like, okay, this is all about burn and counter spells and life gain. Well, I guess no life gain doesn't make any sense here. That's the other thing. No life gain. It makes no sense.
Well, I was going to ask, because you're probably talking about cards like Journey to Memory. Is that a card I'm thinking of? That
Memory's Journey.
Memory's Journey puts things back from your graveyard into your library.
Memory's Journey, Gaia's Blessing, Conjurer's Bauble.
And it sounds like you're into that.
Turn the Earth.
But isn't that effectively life gain here?
Yeah,
so why
sure.
do you like life gain here when you hate life gain everywhere else?
That's a troll question. I will not answer it.
And I think you should answer it. You need to speak for these logical inconsistencies.
No, well, actually, we'll talk about life gain on some future episode, because I have thoughts, evolving thoughts that I want to share, but this is not the place for that, frankly.
I have one other high-level concern about this. I think sometimes you can have a game where there's sort of a very obvious level 1 play pattern, and if people are kind of going along with the bit, they'll attack each other with creatures and mill each other and have a great time. It could be that a better strategy, if there is this like tension that you're trying to develop between, as you're dealing damage to your opponent, they're milling cards that are relevant and makes them more powerful. There could be this situation where you kind of just want to like sit back and not damage your opponent until you can one-shot them. And it very much would depend on the cube list, but if you overtune that, like how much value you get from milling cards, that could be kind of frustrating.
I agree. I think that is a concern, and I think it would entirely depend on the cards included in the list. You could definitely design a cube where it's like, all right, well, everybody's got broken delve spells and Hogax and whatever, and so like the last thing I ever want to do is mill my opponent, especially if you didn't include any cards that self-mill in the list. You know, like Thought Scour is a really interesting card in that list because you want to mill yourself, but also it's now a pretty good burn spell, you know? So it's like...
It says, deal 3 damage to yourself, become more powerful.
Or deal 2 damage to your opponent and, you know, draw a card. Yeah, I think it'd be a question of how much you like made that a part of the list. I don't want people taking the lists that we started because I want you to.
Oh, really? I wanted to share my Battle of Wits cube because I also did have a pretty detailed write up on like categorizing all the different win condition types.
Okay, for this idea, I'm not interested in sharing the list that I have, and more interested in seeing what people would do with the concept.
Right. There's so many ways you could go with it.
Right. I don't know. I guess I'm more interested in seeing what people do with their own sort of spin on things. You mentioned where do ideas come from? I think we should maybe take a second in the middle here just to talk about what an idea is.
I have, pardon my pun, no idea.
I don't mean like epistemologically, biologically speaking, like how does a thought form in someone's brain? I mean that I think you and I, as creative people that have been to art school, might have a different attitude towards ideas than other people, because an attitude I see presented pretty often in the world is that like ideas are special and have value in and of themselves. We work in web development, and I can't tell you how many times, years and years ago, back during the startup craze, we would get approached by somebody that wanted us to sign an NDA before they shared their killer idea with us.
It's Facebook for dogs, and if somebody else finds out about the idea of Facebook for dogs, they will build it first, and I'll be screwed.
Right.
For my great, brilliant idea.
Even if the idea was good, it's like, do you really think you are the only person on the planet that has had this idea? That is not how the world works. And I took great pleasure in refusing to sign any NDAs and telling people they could talk to us anyway if they wanted, but we thought their idea was in and of itself valueless. And a lot of people, it turns out, will just talk to you. They're just like, okay, fine, I guess we'll have a conversation. You don't have to sign an NDA.
Yeah, I mean, the important part being, even if it is a good idea, sure, we're people that build websites, but were we about to like take their idea and spend 3 years developing it? Probably not. It's most of the like value behind the idea is what you do with it.
It's entirely what you do with it, which is why I say that like, I'm sure these ideas have all been had by other people before. I'm sure somebody else has thought of a Sunbleached Cube. Someone else, I know for sure Greg has thought about this idea of like a mill yourself for life total cube. I'm sure 36 other people, maybe listening, have also had this idea. What I have not seen is somebody that has done the work to execute it and bring it to life. And that is a ton of work. And so that is the thing that is of value. I have no problem sharing my ideas for cube lists that I have failed to follow through on. You know, we'll probably jokingly call this Steal Our Cube Ideas episode, but you're not stealing anything, right? This is just a concept. It's an idea that I'm putting out there, we're putting out there, and if you want to run with it and make something of it, it's going to inherently have a bunch of you baked into it. It is not like a thing you can just fully steal, which I guess in this case is part of the reason why like the actual list I'm not that interested in sharing, because I don't want people thinking that like, I put so much time and effort into it that the cards included must be like essential and like shouldn't be cut. And also I think it's more interesting if you listening hear what we're saying about this idea, what we think is interesting about it, and bring your own, what you think is a direction to take that to the table to like bring it somewhere interesting. But if you are the kind of person that is like very protective of ideas and you think they have a bunch of inherent value, I would encourage you to reevaluate, just scrutinize that worldview a little bit and think about how much an idea really has inherent value versus actually executing on it.
So where do ideas come from, though?
Your brain.
Okay. I'm glad we could boil that down to something digestible.
All I'm saying is everybody I ever met that was really protective of ideas, I think was kind of a ding-dong. So don't be a ding-dong.
Yeah, fair.
What's your final cube idea, Anthony? I hope you saved the best for last.
Yeah, I mean, this is an idea that I forget actually if we talked about on the show. And if we did, great, recap. I was really into this idea of creating not necessarily a cube, but more of just a battle box where the entire game happens on a single stack. The idea was kind of like not to make a full cube you're drafting, but more of just like a little magic experience, kind of a mini game. And my hope was the games would take between 5 and 10 minutes, and it could just be like a quick thing you do between rounds. So I designed a list, and the idea was both players have Omniscience. Your starting hand size is 4, your starting life total is 3, and at the beginning of the upkeep, you each cast Lightning Bolt targeting the opposing player. So you have a handful
Active
of...
players is under the inactive players, presumably?
Correct, which is the first funny twist, because you high roll and you realize, wait a minute, I do not want to go first, because then I cast my Lightning Bolt first, and then my opponent casts their Lightning Bolt, and then I'm the first one that has to respond. So I have a specific list for this. It's a bunch of counter spells. It's a bunch of other lightning bolts and different types of burn spells. So one way to win the game is you just cast your lightning bolt on top of your opponents and hope that it resolves. There's also some like funny life gain spells and card draw spells. I thought this idea was kind of fun. I sort of proxied up a little list and playtested it a couple times. It turned out there's a major flaw in this design, and I couldn't figure out...
You don't say.
Well, what do you think the major flaw is?
Well, I mean, I've playtested with you a little bit, so I won't bury the lead. But I think as somebody... I won't rather not bury the lead. I'll do the opposite of... I will bury the lead,
bury the lead.
You can later on...
Spin the yarn.
I think people would obviously look at this idea and say that only a very narrow type of card matters, and it seems very unlikely that there is actually a lot of interesting strategy to be had, and it's just like, okay, well, who has the better hand when there is no pregame, there's no building up of resources, there is only counter spells and life gain and burn, and you just have to be the last one standing. One of you just is going to have more of that, and one of you is going to have less of that, I think is the obvious flaw that people might pick out.
Okay, now that you've buried the lead, what actually happened?
I don't remember.
That happened.
Was that actually it?
Pretty much. I mean, the issue being that, like, there weren't really reasons to ever let a spell resolve, because even if somebody puts a card draw spell on the stack, if that's only going to draw more free card draw spells or only draw more counter spells, you can't really let that resolve either. Like, you don't want them casting a quick study and having another quick study and another counter spell. So really, you just had to either counter or effectively counter by putting another lightning bolt or putting a healing salve on the stack in order to have a way to threaten to win the game. So you're right. It just sort of turned out to be who had more card draw spells or who was able to put the last card on the stack, because that was almost always going to be the winning card.
It feels to me like tic-tac-toe. Like, you could make mistakes. You could throw away a game,
yes.
But I feel like if you played a little bit and thought carefully about it and were like just careful with your decisions, that, yeah, it would be kind of deterministic based on the cards people had access to who would win. And you just be slowly figuring it out as you work through this stack.
I think that's a great analogy, and the first time many people played it, they would be like, okay, you played another lightning bolt targeting me, I will counter that, and then they would say, well, I'll cast a draw spell, and then you would say, well, I don't really care about the draw spell, I'll let that resolve, and there would be some back and forth, and then after a game or two, players just sort of figured that out and kind of solved the game in that sense. It just said, well, I'm just never going to let anything resolve. And some more skilled players just saw that from the beginning, and it was not that interesting. There were some individual cards. I think Flusterstorm in particular was kind of a power outlier and basically just allowed you to win, which I think actually created some more fun gameplay, and that it did feel like there was a little bit of texture, and there were a couple other similar cards that created a little bit of texture. I also tried to add some cards that would create treasures and then be able to, you obviously don't care about the mana because everybody has Omniscience, but like use those treasures in another way, or like upgrade a spell in a way by allowing it to deal more damage, and also including some like smaller burn spells. So maybe you do want to let a shock resolve because you don't really care about it, but then if they have something else to deal 1 damage that you can't counter, could be interesting. Ultimately, yeah, it felt sort of a little bit flawed. There was something missing, and something that I did like about it was I thought I was going to have to errata cards more and twist things more. Turned out all the cards that matter already are instants, like they already function in the way that you would need them to work here, but there wasn't enough that supplied that like extra resource that provided some level of strategy. But I don't know, maybe there is a way to pull it off, and I will also say from the little bit of playtesting we did, it was kind of fun. A lot of people were like, this doesn't work because of this, and I would be like, yeah, but you're smiling, so you're clearly having a good time here.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, that's the part that makes me think, like, is there some other layer to add to this that builds in some strategy? And I think really starting with that core question of what is a reason to motivate players to ever let a spell resolve?
I was inspired by this. This was years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago you came up with this idea initially.
Yeah, this rubber band was crunchy, so it's been a while.
It's been a long time. I remember that this idea of yours actually inspired an idea of mine because I listened to you sort of give the pitch years and years ago, and I was like, I kind of like the idea of fighting over one stack, but I aesthetically, I'm realizing as I get older as a cube designer, I really care a lot about aesthetics. Like I mentioned, like being hung up on having to create my own emblem for like the stupid Minecraft cube, and here I was really bothered by a couple things. I didn't like that we both had a lightning bolt, and therefore there was this weird tension of like who goes first is like kind of actually a disadvantage, and I didn't like the Omniscience emblem, and I was like, could I do this with Lightning Storm? Do you know Lightning Storm from
Is that
Cold
the one
Snap?
that you can exile spells?
You can discard, lands
cards, put charge counters in the
put
spell?
charge counters on it and change the targets. I was like, can we do this with a single Lightning Storm on the stack and not Omniscience? And I was like, could I put enough Manamorphoses in this cube with Elvish and Simian Spirit Guides to then allow you to actually play a game of Magic essentially on the stack where, like, here's what I wanted. I wanted Life from Alome to be castable and good in this cube, where you would have to Simian Spirit Guide, Elvish Spirit Guide, Manamorphose, Quicken, some other mana source, Life from Alome, get back some lands that you somehow discarded for some reason to then put more cards on the Lightning Storm. I still think there is probably a version of that cube that could be possible. And I say cube, it'd probably be a battle box again, where you're like drawing cards at random from like a stack rather than like drafting a deck. I think it is maybe viable, but it quickly fried my brain and would involve breaking Singleton on so many things. And we said before, it's so much harder to break Singleton because then you have to decide how many you're going to include. And it's like, all right, how many Elvish and Simian Spirit Guides do I need for you to actually have access to mana in this environment, to get to a Quicken, to cast a sorcery? And then how do I have people refill their hands because they just spent all these cards on just getting mana? I also had a bunch of treasure producers. I thought treasure producers were sick because I actually cared about the mana and wanted you to be able to cast, like a big score or, whatever, unexpected windfall. I think there's still an idea there. And I have no idea how to execute it, and it'd be way too much work. But I was inspired by your idea to take it a slightly different direction. And maybe somebody listening is going to listen to both these ideas and have an even better idea for how to handle the, like, what if a game of Magic was played entirely on the stack? Yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, one of the other issues I realized is just that it sort of took away that element to bluff, because every single card was you're dead now card. You couldn't be like, well, do I really need to counter this? I don't know how much you have left in your hand. You kind of knew. But then experimenting with like, well, what if we had some other cards that aren't quite as impactful actually was less interesting, because then it really just felt like who drew the more cards that win the game and who drew the fluff. But when you have these cards that are playing multiple roles, it's like, well, this isn't advancing the game in a direct way, but it's allowing me to accrue resources in a way that I can find some other sort of pathway to win that my opponent stands to like question whether or not I'm bluffing. Like, I think that is sort of more interesting space that you're creating with your design.
To be fair, I think even if I did execute this crazy idea where you don't have Omniscience and have to somehow generate mana at instant speed from no lands in play, like, even if I did pull that off, I think it'd be like a parlor trick, and it'd be very often actually a much more complicated road to the exact same outcome you're describing of like, there is a clear deterministic
possibly. And that also sounds like a difficult way to like design the proportions, where you really need your first Simian Spirit Guide or else you can literally do nothing. But then if you draw too many, they don't do anything either. So that's difficult.
I mean, you could definitely include other things to do with cards in your hand. Like,
that's true.
A lot of the treasure making spells are looting spells. But like, again, how are you getting to 4 mana to cast the big score? I didn't get that far. Rituals is how you're getting. Yeah, you're doing it with rituals. You have rituals in black and red, so you could do that. You have to have a lot of Manamorphoses in this list, is what it comes down to. A lot of Manamorphoses to cast a lot of Quickens, which, I don't know, it sounds pretty cool. But at the end of the day, it might end up being exactly the same thing where, you do all this stuff, and in this cube, or list, whatever we're calling it, this battle box, there'd be no counter spells, because the whole point is just one spell that has to resolve, so there would be no counter spells. You would just be playing a game of who can recur the most lands with the cards they draw, and I don't know how to make it more interesting than that. I just think it'd be like a funny engine to be realized, like, what do you mean I'm playing with everything on the stack, and Splendid Reclamation is in my opening hand, and then have Splendid Reclamation be good somehow.
We'll figure it out. Yeah, I mean, just thinking about the aesthetics also, I really did like the gameplay of, we're not building up board states in a traditional Magic sense. We're just laying up these 2 cards sort of staggered, stacking up, and we can literally lay out every card on the stack. Was kind of a fun experience, and somebody walking by could be like, oh, you're playing this silly mini game. I can see exactly what the whole board state is just by looking at what the stack is.
The stack tells the tale of the whole game.
Exactly, yeah, which is pretty cool. So, I think there are like a couple aesthetic nuggets there that I really appreciated.
Last idea. This is my idea that I am most sure is mine, as in I had this idea. I've never heard anybody else talk about it. Shout out.
Does that even matter?
Doesn't matter, but it only matters in the sense that I don't want to make Greg or Jane mad at me if they feel like this is an idea they were sort of holding dear. So this one I feel 100% fine giving away. And I think it's also the best idea. This is a cube that I tried to design a few years ago called 3 Wishes. I think it's just the complete package, and I'll explain the problems when I get there. My concept was, there are so many cubes where people want to make kind of committal build-around cards playable. Like, I think the Companion Cube is a great example of this. The Degenerate Microcube was solving a lot of the same problems in that it gave you access to a card very reliably. There's other cubes that, say you draft 1 copy, you get 4 or whatever. There's so many like things in cube design that are basically people trying to make cool build-arounds that, are really important to the structure of your deck, where if your deck doesn't draw it, everything doesn't really work, making those somewhat viable. I thought a really awesome way to get at that same idea would be to have a cube where there are draft packages, but only for the wishes, the cards that take cards out of your sideboard, which are cards that also tend to not really do a lot in Cube lists because it's singleton. You had to draft every card. Why would I put a Burning Wish in my deck or draft it when I could just draft whatever I was going to get with the Burning Wish? And why do I have the card I want to get the Burning Wish for in my sideboard? That makes no sense. I should have it in my main deck if it's a good card. And if it's a bad card, why am I Burning Wishing for it, right? Like, it just doesn't really work in like singleton drafted environments. And so my thought was, okay, well, what if when you drafted a wish, you got 3 of them, hence 3 wishes, which is also a cool aesthetic tie-in. Like, the name works. It's like very resonant in a way that I think is very pleasing. You get more copies of those wishes, so you then now are incentivized to actually put the Burning Wish in your deck because you have 3 copies, and now you are incentivized to put your build around in the sideboard because you could only draft single copies of all the other cards, but now you can turn your wishes into copies of whatever you leave in the sideboard between each match. I love this idea. I think it's so sick. I think there are so many directions you could go with it, and there is one massive problem. Do you know what that is, Anthony?
So sorry, the parameters where you want packages for each wish, where when you draft the wish, you get 3 copies.
Yes, that is the idea. Is
the issue that the wishes are horribly asymmetrical and Burning Wish is pretty good and the White Wish is awful?
That is, in fact, the whole issue. The wish cycle is really, really not evenly balanced. Let me pull up my list, actually. I should say, too, I didn't also include, I wasn't just doing the original wish cycle. There are other cards that have wished in Magic's history. So, like, Fae of Wishes is a much better blue wish than Cunning Wish. Though Cunning Wish is not the worst. The worst one is the white one by far. Burning Wish is great. I think Living Wish is actually really great. The green one is just 1 and a green for a sorcery to get a creature or land card from outside the game and put it into your hand. I think the one problem with this card, and the reason we don't see this in like a bunch of other cubes just by default, is that I don't know if the rules of Retail Limited are that you can get any basic land.
You can, for sure.
Okay, you're certain of that.
Yeah. Don't at me.
Do you have to have registered it in your sideboard before the game begins?
No, you always have all basic lands in your sideboard.
You don't in Constructed.
Really?
For sure not.
Okay, whose idea was that?
Constructed, you have to get one of the cards from your sideboard, so you have to put the lands there if you want to be able to get them. I'm not certain of how this works in the official rules, but at its baseline, 2 mana to get any basic land, if your cube is playing that way, whether that's by the rules or not, is pretty okay. And then I think creatures are you could put a big expensive creature in the sideboard so that this is always a modal spell of either draw whatever basic land I need to mana fix or draw me a giant threat that I maybe don't want to put main deck because I only sometimes want it to be in my opening hand. Right? I don't want my giant threat in my opening hand. I only want it in the late game. And now I'm going to instead play this card that is a modal, big threat, or a land, basically. That one's really strong. Karn the Great Creator is insanely strong. The colorless Wish card, the Planeswalker.
And are you finding this with OTAG Wish on Scryfall?
I haven't touched this list in years. I never remember to search by the OTAGs, and so I was just searching by whatever combination of rules text said you owned from outside the game, basically. The Raven's Warning is a cool saga that wishes. There's also Glittering Wish, Wish for gold cards, which are pretty okay. At the time, white had nothing close to a viable wish, really, at all. Which, makes sense. There's a color pie magic for a reason, and, white not having a wish that is viable. The one is a 5-mana wish for an artifact or enchantment. I believe it's sorcery speed. Is that correct? Are you looking at it right now?
Golden Wish? 5-mana sorcery.
5-mana sorcery for an artifact or enchantment, which is a callback to an era of Magic where cards were just designed and built differently. It's so out of balance with Living Wish and things like that.
It also exiles itself, just to be safe. Don't abuse this.
Do they all exile themselves from the first list? Yeah, they all exile themselves,
okay.
I think.
I've learned that now.
So, I think that is your problem to overcome. And I think the Chad way to overcome that problem is to design the cube so that Golden Wish is playable. Meaning, your artifact and enchantment build-arounds are a lot better than your instant and sorcery build-arounds, and the entire cube is pretty slow and pretty junky so that you can afford to get to 5 mana to go get your build-around and start your game plan and not having been run over by some storm deck in the meantime with Living Wish. I think that's the Chad way to do it. That's also doing it on hard mode because 5 mana sorcery for artifact or enchantment is such a steep cost. That is really hard to make that competitive with the more competitively costed wishes. So you're going to have a lot of restraint and do probably a lot of playtesting to figure out how to make that work. I think that's the Chad way to solve that problem. The way to solve the problem...
so hard because if you're making those the best payoffs, you are just going to put them in your deck rather than making them cost 5 more.
Right, for the most part, yeah.
Making them cost 2 more to mitigate some of that opening hand issue, sure, you can see your way around that. 5 is a lot of mana.
Well, I don't think it's just mitigating the opening hand issue. Again, if I have... let's say I have what's a really good build around sorcery.
I guess if you're saying you have 3 copies
You
of
have 3
this.
copies of it, so it's worth doing it because your first copy costs 2 more, but you are going to have way more access to that copy because you have 3 in your deck.
But then you're going to like structure the draft in a way that you really, because if you get 3 payoffs that are as good as Golden Wish, just put all 3 of those in your deck and don't worry about it.
I think the problem is
so you want to be able to only have people draft 1 of them, but then you're putting in 3 copies of a card that only gets 1 card. It sounds tough.
It sounds tough with Golden Wish, and this is the reason I eventually abandoned this idea with a heavy heart, because I do think it's so cool. Everything else about it is so sick. I think it's really cool to motivate people to leave a good card in the sideboard just by like a draft package and not, any other sort of rules modification. A draft package is a real rules modification, but at least this is a draft package where it's like completely clear, and I would probably mark in the sleeve or something just so it was 100% clear, which cards are draft packages and which ones are not. I also think it's very cool then to think about what happens when you draw your next Burning Wish, and you can include cards in this cube that care about, names of cards in your graveyard or like copies of the same spell, which are usually kind of...
But that doesn't work because it removes itself from the game.
It's complicated, but I think it's interesting that you could maybe you tuck... I guess you can't put Cunning Wish under Isochron Scepter. This is complicated.
Surgical Extraction. There's a card that cares about card names.
Yeah,
that would be lots of fun here.
That would not be lots of fun here.
So there's been some interesting precedent in the meantime, because we just played, or at least saw, Bones' Arcane Lessons cube at Saltbox, and he's modified the rules such that every instant sorcery is a lesson, and they're just a whole bunch of cards that learn.
And by the time this episode comes out, people will have heard the episode with Bones where we've talked about that.
Which means, from what I heard, people just put their best instant sorceries in their sideboard and be like, yeah, I have 3 to 12 ways to get it in my deck, and that just makes that a really powerful strategy. So I wouldn't be surprised if you could actually trim down on some of the rules here, like skip the draft packages, just put like 5 copies of Burning Wish, 5 copies of Living Wish, maybe more than that, and
you
then...
You can't call it 3 wishes.
Well, let me finish, and then sort of structure the cube around those motivations, and then if you're worried, like, okay, well, the white one isn't very good, could you actually build that in as a feature of the cube to say, well, white is the anti-wish color? Are there like specific cards that prevent those wishes from working or interact with it in an interesting negative way? I think that actually could create a lot more nice texture to the draft.
You're going to glimpse the eternities or whatever? What's the white spell that takes a card from exile and puts it into
not that silly, but
I mean,
there's got to be some other cards that...
You're trying to wish for that. I mean, did the wish cards even target? They don't, right? So you would just choose. So they would cast it, and you would have to guess what they were going to wish for and then put it into their graveyard with... whatever that stupid...
I'll figure out what card that is. I don't think that card works that way, but I'm saying I think there could be ways to say, like, hey, this cube is largely about wishes, but not every single color needs to care about wishes in the same way, and it could just be doing something different. And then the name issue, I don't know, you just have to get over that. That's the hardest part.
Scarfall's going slow, but I'm looking at this card. I imagine that card probably says card you own in exile. You probably can't interact with other opponents' stuff. Well, I guess... Well, wasn't it printed in a set where it was meant to, like, mess with imprint or something?
I feel like there's got to be a bunch of new white cards that, like, prevent you from casting your commander that would interfere with wishes. I don't know if that's true.
I don't think that's going to be true. But let's see. Pull from Eternity is what I'm talking about. Put target face-up card that's exiled from the game into its owner's graveyard. I think you could do that with
I don't think they count as being exiled from the game when they're in your sideboard. No, they don't.
But that's how Karn's worded. I'm going to check the rulings on... I see what you're saying. Yeah. This is a dumb guy moment. Yeah. Okay, so it just has never been exiled. What does Burning Wish say? Burning Wish says...
It says you choose a card you own from outside the game. And the wording of
how did it get outside the game?
A card outside the game in casual play is any card you own, and in any kind of structured play is a card in your sideboard. Anyway,
I really wish the Pull from Eternity page would load so I could read the rules.
Ways to make this work without necessarily as much custom rules and sort of working around that specific limitation.
And honestly, like I was going to mention, not even just specifically Arcane Lessons, but a lot of people have built various lesson cubes, and like Learn is a mechanic that, does turn a lot of cards into semi-wishes, and I think that might be just the cleaner way to do this. Maybe Arcane Lessons is essentially what this cube should be. This idea predates that and was just, again, I'm kind of married to the name here real quick. Pull from Eternity targets a card in the exile zone. A card is only face down in the exile zone if an effect put it there specifically says so. That's actually not necessarily confusing. Can you put a card from your opponent's sideboard into their graveyard with Pull from Eternity? I don't think you can.
I am pretty confident, no.
That would be crazy.
It'd be a weird thing to do.
The aesthetic tie-in really does it for me. Like calling it 3 wishes is pretty important to the concept for me, but yeah, maybe that's why it just doesn't work.
Maybe it's you have 8 times 3 wishes, and so on average everybody's got 3 if you choose to draft them.
Yeah, I don't know about that. So yeah, That's my last idea that I think has the most legs and is so kind of close, but always are going to be hard to execute. We didn't do it for a reason, and it wasn't that we just got lazy. It was that these are hard ideas, I think, to make work because they have some critical challenge at their core that it needs to be overcome. And in this case, it is the, I think, massive imbalance of the power level of the lessons, power level of the wishes, which I said earlier, the Chad way to fix it would be just to design the wish so that Golden Wish is playable. The other way to fix it is to design a custom wish that is better. Just make Golden Wish cost 2 mana or whatever, and maybe tweak a couple of the other wish cards. And that would be fine, but much less exciting to me. It's not what I wanted to do, but could be a cool way to solve that problem. That's the scale of rules modification that Bones is already doing with Lessons and Learn. And so it's like, well, why not just do what Bones is doing if that's what you're going to do? Real quick, last little idea to steal here. This is not a cube idea, but this is the thing I've been rolling around in my head for years, which I think would be very cool, which I have never really been able to follow through on. Because also, fatal flaw. I would love to design a little package of cards that are designed at like a abstractly kind of high-ish power level that are meant to be, in theory, slotted into like most cubes. If you wanted to, you could just put these, call it, 24 cards in. And what these 24 cards would do would be introduce and interact with Ante into the cube environment. Because I think there is something to the idea. I mean, Ante, for what it's worth, for those who don't know, Ante is like a very, very, very ancient way that used to be involved in Magic, where you would
an ancient ritual where
you would
handed down from the Richard Garfield.
And I believe the original rules of it was you would literally exile the top card of your library at the beginning of the game, regardless of what it was. So it could just be a basic Plains, it could be a Black Lotus, whatever it was. That card was now
like something good at the time, like Crawworm.
That card was now the stakes of the match, and whoever won got the ante. And they quickly abandoned this because it ran afoul of gambling laws. And
also, apparently, no players enjoyed it, and it felt bad.
That has also been said many times on Drive to Work. Obviously, why would you play for ante when, that's the sort of stakes? I think Cube is one place where this could work. So again, Wizards not touching this because not fun inherently, and I think the other reason they will never come back to it no matter what is because it runs afoul of gambling laws, and they can't risk that, obviously. I think they've probably returned to a lot of things that a lot of players said weren't fun that they have since tried to make work, but this one is probably going to stay
But also,
untouched.
Gambling is totally fine in the US now, apparently.
The reason I think this could work in Cube, obviously, is that a huge part of the reason it's unfun fundamentally is because you showed up with your cards in your deck, and now you're going to risk one of your cards for unknown stakes. That sucks. If it's a cube, that is not true anymore. You're just drafting someone's cube. You don't leave with these cards. They're always part of the cube, and so you have them for the rest of the night. The idea also would be to change ante, because I think a random card makes no sense. I think ideally anteing a card should be like essentially cascading until you hit a spell of any kind, and then that one becomes the one ante, skip over lands. And then I would also introduce cards that interacted with ante in interesting ways, like allowed you to, for example, play ante cards for free without paying their mana cost, because you're often going to ante cards that you couldn't play in your deck anyway, so you're going to get cards from the ante that you wouldn't want to play, so who cares about that in the first place? Or cards that allowed you to fix for mana on spells you're casting that you don't own. There's a lot of interesting ideas there, and these could be really powerful cards that had like a cost of anteing, right? Like you could have an Ancestral Recall that requires you to like ante 2, and now 2 cards get added to the ante zone. A lot of fundamental problems with this. I know you got to go, but I want to drop that little bead at the end here for somebody else out there to design a package of 24 ante cards that you could theoretically drop into many cubes.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of going to a cube night, playing 3 rounds, and having your deck evolve a little bit over those 3 rounds does sound really appealing, in a way that I'm sure, like, originally in the design of Magic the Gathering, that kind of, like, little bit of flow of cards was the intention of Ante. I think there are some major issues with it, which I think we could do a whole episode about, probably.
I don't know about a whole episode, but I'll say this before we get all the comments. Everyone's going to say, oh, but now the better decks get better and the worst decks get worse. Who cares?
That's the design.
The better decks are playing each other and the worst decks are playing each other, so that's fine. That's not a problem. I don't care about that aspect at all. The bigger challenge is making it so that the cards you anteed are actually interesting to you in future games and not just cards you completely ignore because they weren't they weren't the cards you drafted in the first place.
I drafted all
anyway.
red cards and I got this black card and I don't want to put it in my deck.
That's why I think the cards that have anti-payoffs have to be really good. Like, you get to free cast anti-spells or something. Now you're really excited about it. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you for tuning in and steal our ideas. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by Matthew. You can support everything we do at Lucky Paper, including Lucky Paper Radio and the Cube Fellowship, on our Patreon, which is linked in the show notes, where you can also hear Anthony and I talk about things that are not magic on a whole separate podcast called Magic Doesn't Exist.
Not only pickles.
Not only pickles.
Mostly pickles.
Not only pickles. If you want to find out what personal dream I'm now pursuing for the first time in my life, you can go over there and check that out on Magic Doesn't Exist. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by speaking into microphones and thinking really hard about Magic cards, and not in that order. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for sharing all your least finished Cube ideas.
Oh no, there's
that's not
many
correct.
more least finished Cube ideas. These are the ones I think are worth maybe stealing. There are so many that are just in the poo-poo bucket and should stay there forever.